Hi, I'm host Aaron Strout, and today on the Reaching Higher podcast, I'm honored to welcome Kathy Giusti, a leader whose life work has transformed what's possible for cancer care patients around the world. Named to the Time 100 Most Influential People, Fortune's 50 Greatest Leaders, and Forbes 50 Over 50, Kathy brings a rare credibility earned not just in boardrooms, but at the bedside. A two-time cancer survivor, healthcare entrepreneur, and patient advocate, Kathy has lived the healthcare system from every angle as a patient, a founder, a pharma executive, and a teacher. As the founder of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, or MMRF, she turned a 3-year prognosis into a 30-year movement, raising over $600 million, accelerating more than 15 FDA-approved therapies, and tripling life expectancy for patients worldwide. From advising U.S. presidents to shaping future leaders at Harvard Business School, Kathy continues to challenge how healthcare works. Today, she joins us to share lessons on courage, innovation, and fixing a broken system. Kathy, I am thrilled to have you here today, and it's such a pleasure to see you, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Well, I mentioned this to you up front, and I'm trying a new experiment. And so you're the third person I think that I'm trying this with. And I just modeled this at a South by Southwest panel that we did. And it was a fun way to get things going and sort of get the juices flowing. Not that that's going to be a difficult thing with you to get our conversation in flow. But there are these flash questions, and two of them are sort of frivolous. One's bigger than a bread box. So if you're game, I'm going to jump right in and ask you the questions. The last one probably requires more than a one-word answer, but the first two can just be a single answer if you want to. So
Okay.
the
Ready?
first one is, if you could only watch one genre of movies, what would it be?
I don't go to the movies, but I stream, and it's murder mysteries.
Ooh, I love that. That's a good one. Your perfect flavor combo is X.
Oh, salt and caramel.
Salt and caramel. Wow.
Yeah.
I liked you a lot before this, and I like you even more now because that is an underappreciated flavor profile or a combo. So this is off to a great start. And then this is the bigger one, and that is the world would be a better place if blank.
If we treated our fellow humans like we treat our dogs.
Oh, I like that one a lot. Because I think not everyone is a dog owner, but people can at least imagine what that's like. And we baby our dogs and we love
Yes.
them so much. And yeah, it would be a simpler and better place if we could do that. So great
I think
answer.
my family would appreciate it.
I mean, I think everyone would, right? Okay, we're going to get into some of the questions that are, threading through your career and all the amazing things that you've done that we've mentioned up front in the intro. But I want to talk a little bit about this CEO mindset.
Mm.
So you often advocate for patients adopting a CEO mindset when navigating their care, which I love. I hadn't really heard about this before, so
Mhm.
this is cool. How can someone who's feeling physically and emotionally depleted by a diagnosis realistically step into that high-level executive role for their own health?
Well, they don't have a choice because in today's world, the science is moving so fast that you have to be on top of it as a patient because you care about your cancer more than anybody else does. So, the way I tell everybody to be the CEO of their own healthcare is to make sure you're running the show. You know what the goal is. The goal is for you to extend your life and hopefully get cured. How you do it is up to your leadership style. So, for some people, they're going to take this on all on their own because they may have a science background, they're in the healthcare industry, they feel very comfortable doing it. But for most people, you have to decide, okay, how do I delegate some of these responsibilities in finding the best outcomes from me? And it may be that you find people on your caregiving team, somebody that loves to do the research for you, somebody else who's going to step in and help take care of your family. It may also be that you now have to find the resources that are available to you because I'm always shocked at how many resources patients have, but they don't know they're out there. So, an example I can give you very quickly is I'm shocked at how many patients there are with multiple myeloma that have never reached out to the MMRF, the organization I founded. Not because they don't care or they don't find it super helpful. They don't know we're there. And so when I talk about being CEO of your own cancer journey, what I mean is you've got to decide how you're going to find the best outcomes for you. And you've got to decide which steps you're going to take, how much you're going to take on yourself, how much you're going to reach out to other family members, and how much you're going to reach out to the other resources. But at the end of the day, you've got to find the best doctors, the best treatments, and the best approaches for you. You care the most.
Well, it makes sense. And so I think framing it that way, that take control of your own fate, but don't be afraid to outsource
Yeah.
and delegate is really critically important, because I know a lot of people, I'd probably do the same thing, where you don't want to bother anyone. You don't want to, you want to be the one that's driving the ship, but it's a lot to deal with, right? And it can
Right.
be overwhelming and is overwhelming for a lot of folks. And I think you made a great point, which will segue us to that next question, talking about this thing called the venture philanthropy model.
Mm.
And you established this at the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, MMRF, as you just mentioned. So looking back, what was the biggest corporate risk you took that traditional nonprofits were afraid to touch, and how did it pay off for patients?
So back then, because remember the MMRF was founded in 1998, so that was a while ago. The biggest risk we took was the most natural for me, and that was to focus specifically on research and drug development. Back then, almost all of the patient groups were doing more support group work or a little bit of policy, but nobody was taking on research. There were three of us, Michael J. Fox, cystic fibrosis, and ourselves, all three of us in different diseases. And fortunately, we all shared ideas and information with each other. We were friends. And I think that was unbelievably helpful. I think the other part of what really set the MMRF apart was we were not just a funding entity, we were a doing entity. So we would convene the best in class, we would create a straw man of a model with new incentives that we thought would drive new ideas forward. And then we would build that model ourselves and then fund it and then decide if it was working well enough and tweak it and modify it and keep rebuilding those models until they worked. The example you gave was one that's interesting because it was one of the later models. Like for us, we're known as doing the tissue banking to the genomic initiative to building our own clinical network to the Compass study. And eventually the investment fund came along. That actually came about when I was up at Harvard and we were sharing ideas, cystic fibrosis, JDRF. JDRF was doing the T1D fund, and we modeled our venture fund after theirs. And I'm a huge fan of this, by the way. I think that nonprofits have really good ideas to share. And the more that we can share across cancers and diseases, especially looking at these business models, the faster we will make progress, especially today. You have to have the right players in the room, and everybody's got to decide what role they're playing.
Well, it makes sense. And I think people do forget that there's that age-old saying of a rising tide floats all boats.
Yes.
And, look, we need people to get better and to be well and to be healthy. And there is so much knowledge to be shared there. I sit on a nonprofit board, the Tiger Lily Foundation. And, one of the things I'm trying to do is, because I have the show and I get to meet a lot of amazing people like you, is encourage people like Mayma Karmo, who is the CEO and founder, to network with people like yourself and others. And I'm sure you all know each other. You're nodding your head, but it's a shame when we don't do that. And by the way, a little sidebar, because you mentioned him. Do you watch the show Shrinking by any chance?
Yes, I've seen it. Yes.
So slight spoiler alert, although it doesn't really do too much, but Michael J. Fox actually makes a couple of cameo appearances on it. And it's really, I love, because obviously he's degenerated a fair amount due to this horrible disease, but I love that he's advocating by appearing on the show and doing what he's doing and showing up to Harrison Ford, who's one of the characters. And so anyway, I digress.
I love their model. I love the entire organization. He's done an unbelievable job, as has Debbie Brooks. They're terrific.
Well, and just I'm always impressed when, whether it's parents that lose a child or someone that goes through one of these diseases, when they turn that negative into a positive and really sort of shine that light in the world. It's amazing. Like you've done, after suffering 2 bouts of, rounds with these horrible diseases. And instead of just sitting back and sort of throwing up your arms, you said, nope, we're going to do something important about it. This is another thing that you've done that I really like, and I wish that we could, well, we're starting to do this now, but scream this from the rooftops. And it's this idea of breaking silos. So you touched on this in your last answer, but you've spent decades getting researchers, pharma, and regulators to actually talk to one another. Novel idea that like the people that are sort of creating our healthcare system don't talk. So what is the biggest systemic bottleneck that's still slowing down cures today, and how do we solve it?
Well, I think it comes back to our healthcare system is still unbelievably fragmented and incredibly hard to navigate at all. And I think what we have to do, and the reason that we were successful in myeloma, was you have to keep studying the landscape. You have to understand who are the best players at the table. And so for us, when we were starting out, it was, okay, how do we bring pharma, biotech, FDA, academic centers, community centers, patients, everybody at the table, and design these models, and then look at the incentives that are going to drive them forward. I think the bottleneck or it's an opportunity technically, as we move forward, is going to be the opportunities around AI. Because the biggest bottleneck we faced was the ability to generate the highest quality of data to answer the questions we have on curing our disease. And so we had to develop models like the COMPASS study, which was a major $40 million longitudinal study following patients over time. And I feel like that ability to generate the highest quality of data for the entire myeloma community to see was a huge game changer for us. Now we're in this world where, again, the quality of the data and how we interrogate that data using humans is going to help us drive how we use AI to absolutely accelerate cures. So I think the obstacle is the data and that quality of data that we need. And I think the opportunity is going to be AI as a potential third party, perhaps driving everybody to the table together.
Well, because you mentioned it, I'd love to drill down on this a little bit, and then we'll go back to your book, which is the next question I originally was going to ask. But you helped launch this COMPASS study that you just referenced to sequence the myeloma genome. Why is it so critical for patients to own and share their data, and what should they ask their doctors to ensure that they are contributing to the bigger picture? You mentioned the AI piece. That's sort of a no-brainer, but I think there are a lot of different reasons why being able to own and share your data is critically important across a lot of different disease states.
Yeah, well, I learned firsthand very early on as a myeloma patient that my tissue and data was gold. There were two reasons for that. One was a Friday night, getting a bone marrow biopsy, and two scientists standing outside the door with a red igloo cooler just waiting to work on it. I mean, they wanted those live cells. That was a really interesting time when I was like, okay, well, why is this so hard? And that's why we built a collaborative tissue bank in myeloma. And then moving forward, we said, okay, if you have that high quality tissue, that's what's going to help you understand the genomics of it. And at that point in time, genomic sequencing was just starting. We knew we wouldn't get the TCGA to necessarily do myeloma, so we decided to take that on with the COMPASS study. The reason it's so important is because following patients over time and using our samples that we can now do sequencing, immune profiling, you name it on it, and seeing what happens over time with the treatment is the answer to so many of the questions. So yes, our tissue is gold, our data is gold. The issue we run into in uncommon cancers like multiple myeloma is you need critical mass. So you can't just say, oh, Dana-Farber, put together all the samples from your tissue bank, because there's not enough for these rare tumors. You have to get Dana-Farber to share with the Mayo Clinic and Moffitt Cancer Center, everybody. And so the ability to put all of that together is exactly what we did in COMPASS. But we then follow those 1,000 patients over time for years and years. And then we put the data out into the public domain for all the scientists to share. Now, building models like that is really complex because you've got to get everybody to agree on the protocol. You've got to bring in back then CROs. You've got to decide who's doing the sequencing. We had to have outside peer review. And we also, oh, by the way, we also had to find a way to fund it, which was a licensing agreement with some of the pharmaceutical companies that got an early look at the data. So you have to be super creative. And that's why I always say, curing cancer is not just a science or clinical problem. It's a business problem. It's driven by the incentives by which we can do these models that will change everything. And so I think the learnings we had from a study like COMPASS and how much it's used, I mean, it's had over 350 publications, is a telltale sign to what we need to do now in immunotherapy. The questions I'm getting every day in immunotherapy are really tough questions, and we're not able to answer them right now. What dose? What combination? What sequence? When do I take a CAR T versus a bispecific, versus an ADC? It's complex, but we could answer it if we actually had high quality data that was being combined.
Well, it's a great answer. And just for those, one, I will make sure I put this in the show notes, but Compass is spelled COMMPASS if you do want to take a look at that. And thank you for advocating for that, because I think we can't get enough of it. And again, across multiple disease states, the more data we have that you can sort of be empowered with and work with your physician, it's really so critically important. I do want to touch on your book. Great title, by the way. It's called Fatal to Fearless. And in the book, you describe the progression from WTF, which means what you think it does, what the F, to WTD, which is what to do. So for someone currently in that WTF shock phase, which I know I've heard from multiple friends and people that sort of originally are diagnosed, what is the single most important thing they should do in the first 48 hours after diagnosis?
Well, boy, that has changed, because I had two WTFs. I had it 30 years ago when I was 37 and diagnosed with myeloma. At that point, there was no internet. So I was knocking on the door of Borders before it opened to get Harrison's and the Merck manual and try to learn everything I could. My diagnosis with breast cancer came just a couple of years ago. And in that situation, I went in to do my search and was inundated with literally millions of outputs on what to do with breast cancer. So what I always say to everybody in those first 48 hours are, number one, take a huge, deep breath. Because odds are you got your diagnosis or the suspicion of a diagnosis through your portal. I mean, it used to be our doctors called us. Like, they're not doing that anymore. So now you get it on your portal. While you were sitting on that portal trying to figure out what the heck just happened, you have to go in and literally copy it and understand exactly what they're saying. Because I know what you're going to do next. And what you're going to do next is put it into a search engine and do some research on it, which I understand, and that's fine, to get you a certain amount of information. And then in today's world, what you're doing after that is you're moving from Google on to ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, wherever it may be, and you're going to ask them questions. I don't have a problem with that either, as long as you know how to do the prompts, which is really hard for a newly diagnosed patient. But the most important thing you can do is go in and say, if this is my diagnosis, I would like you to give me back the best questions to ask my doctor about this diagnosis using the most updated peer-reviewed information. And, that will give you a certain amount of information. At the end of the day, what you're trying to do is prepare yourself to use the time you have, which is limited, with your doctor the most effectively. I mean, your first meeting with a doctor is often more of a consult, so you may get a little bit more time, but technically after that, you get 15 minutes on average. So every time you need to make decisions, you have to walk into that doctor's office just with the information you need to get your questions answered. And that's the most important part for patients.
So I have a sort of dive in question because you spurred it. I'm working with a company right now and helping them on some of their marketing and positioning work. And one of my colleagues today shared a prompt library, which actually goes pretty deep in a variety of different functions. Because I think people don't really understand how important it is to get the prompts correct.
Right.
Is there anything or any organization that is doing this today? Is this something, for instance, that the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation did or will do? Because I do feel like that's something people don't think about. We automatically turn to Dr. Google or Dr. ChatGPT. But if you're not putting the prompt in right, maybe just copying and pasting, as you said, from the portal, then it can take you in a bunch of wild directions. But, if you're very prescriptive about it and you actually ask it the right questions, then you can get a much more holistic answer.
It's really true. I think that it's funny because, I'm on social media and I'll put out a fair amount of information on AI. And in all honesty, it doesn't do as well as you would think. And so what it reminds me is that there are patients like me that are just going to be using it all the time. And we have so many questions. And then there are still a lot of patients that aren't yet using it. And then there are some that are probably going in and just doing one prompt. So at the MMRF, because we have a full-time, full-blown navigation team of oncology nurses that specialize in myeloma, they do this for you. I mean, it's unbelievable what we offer patients because they can go in and help you find the trials, the doctors, the treatments, whatever you need. That's why I'm always astounded that we don't have every patient calling the MMRF. But they do the prompts. But you're asking a really good question. I don't know that they necessarily send out the exact prompt. I've done quite a few pieces on how to use ChatGPT in the hopes that the people that aren't caring about AI will eventually catch up. Or if they don't want to do that kind of research, they're giving it to one of their children or somebody else to help them with. But I think it is the wave of the future for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's, we won't do a deep dive into AI, but most of the artificial intelligence engines, and you mentioned several of them, are based on what's called a large language model, right? So they have to go out and source that information from somewhere. And I
Yeah.
was a week ago old when I found out that some of these LLMs, depending on what they are, lean more deeply into things like YouTube or Twitter or, other areas. But the more prescriptive you can be and the more you can get it thinking, for instance, like a oncologist or some type of specialist versus just doing a general search where, you can type it into Google and anybody can get that answer, really does make a huge difference. And I love the fact that MMRF is doing such a great job at partnering with and providing that type of information. So
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. You have to look at the research, like look at open evidence where the doctors have access to that. It seems like an amazing tool for them to use. They're not necessarily looking at sharing that with patients yet. But again, here's my hope. I hope that these AI companies will reach out to people like myself who live and breathe in this space and understand. I sat through an entire day on AI at one of the medical meetings recently, and I loved what they had to say, right? But to give you just one example where we have to be careful is if you can now use AI, say you're sitting at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and now the AI can actually, before the patient arrives, tell you every clinical trial available for that patient. Well, academic centers do well by enrolling patients in their trials. So now all of a sudden we can go from patients never seeing trials to now patients having a few trials, a lot of things to be looking at. The trial may be the best thing for them. It may not be the best thing for them. It may overwhelm them more than they're already overwhelmed. And so I think we have to think through every time we move toward AI. I hope that companies will get the patient voice in the room to at least understand the implications of it's going to put yet another burden on us because it's another decision that patients have to make that they may not know how or they may not be prepared for.
right. No, that's a great point. And I think we do miss that step a lot of times. So
Yeah.
that's good advocacy right there. I do want to talk about something, and you wear a lot of hats or have worn a lot of different hats, but you're the co-chair of the Kraft Precision Medicine Accelerator at Harvard. You mentioned Harvard up front. So what emerging technology like AI or gene editing are you most fearless about regarding its potential to change the survival curve?
Okay, so I've definitely touched on this, but let me go into it a bit deeper. But I do feel that I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I do feel part of it is AI in every which way. But here are the different things that I'm looking at. One is the beauty of AI in imaging. I mean, it's going to be unbelievably helpful. Second is AI in the actual area of drug development. The third is if we're going to speed drug development, how are we going to match the patients to the trials? The third is the patients are going to eventually have their own agents out there helping them to decide what to do exactly with their kind of cancer. How does that affect the patient-doctor relationship? So I'm very strong on AI, but I'm also, again, a business person who wants to make sure that all the players in the room are truly putting the patient first, which that's hard to do if you don't have the patient in the room who's also a savvy patient who understands how the whole system works. And I also want to make sure that the incentives align in the right way to make this work. And so, again, I'm a huge opportunist, but I love to see things done well and to understand everybody's going to have an agenda. I get that, and it's perfectly fine. That's business. But we all have to compromise somewhere on behalf of the betterment for the patient.
Yeah, well, and I love that you keep bringing it back to the fact that this is a business, right? And I think the more we can look at it through that lens and then get it to work to our own benefit is really critically important. So
I mean, the
thank you
beauty
for
is
that.
we have, I think the greatest strides we've made recent is immunotherapy. I mean, the effectiveness, I mean, think about this, where myeloma was when I was diagnosed 100% fatal, I was given 3 years to live. Today, myeloma has a 62% 5-year survival. So the speech I often give is, can we cure this disease in my lifetime? I think it's doable because that would be 15 years from now, we're at a 92% 5-year survival. But how we get there means diagnosing early, treating smoldering, understanding how to do clinical trials better, understanding how to sequence these immunotherapies, how to combine them. So you could write an entire plan of how you do this, but the thing that's going to be the accelerator underneath every piece of that is going to be AI.
Well, that's a good one. And I mean, it's unbelievable to think about the power that AI can bring to us. And I love that you brought up that concept of the agents. There's a woman, Faith Popcorn, who you may have heard of. And she was talking about sort of agents and the role they'll play on behalf of us as consumers. And I think that we haven't really started to talk about, these are sort of the not chatbots, but like AI bots that you can sort of customize to be your digital twin if you want to, right? And so they start to know what your needs are. And so you don't have to be the one that keeps the 5,000 things in your head. And you can say, I don't want to do this type of thing or buy from this type of company or work with this type of service, or I would like to do these things. So I think that's a good one that we'll have to probably keep our eye on and spend more time on down the road. You have a unique perspective in the fact that you've been both a patient and you've done caregiving for your sister. And, you know, neither is an enviable situation to be in, but I think a lot of us have one or the other and hopefully not both in our lifetimes. What is the one thing caregivers often get wrong because they are trying too hard to be helpful?
Oh, I think there's probably 3 things they get wrong. So I think the issue is that the patient has to understand the needs they have. Number 2, the patient has to then reach out to the caregivers to support them, but allow the caregivers to do what they're really good at. Like, nobody would ever want me to go cook your meals, but they would really want me to go do their research for them. And that's what I would rather do. So I think the ability to understand your needs as a patient and then articulate those wisely to the caregiver is the most important part. I think the other part is, again, if you're CEO of your own healthcare, then you want to have that calendar that allows people to know, when is the tricky part for you? Are you in diagnostic stage? Are you in treatment stage? Are you in survivor stage? What exactly does the calendar look like right now? Because one of the things that can drive you crazy as a caregiver are all the last minute calls. Somebody else was going to cover that, or you forgot that that treatment was happening, or you didn't put it together. So I think that can drive you crazy. The last thing is the patient has to say thank you. I mean, if you read my book at the end, you'll see how my family felt like, I mean, they gave up a lot in their life for someone like me who's been a survivor for 30 years, on again, off again with cancer. It's tricky, but I think I found this with my sister and I was working with my sister and my mom at the same time. My sister had stage 3 breast cancer and was being treated at MSK. My mom had melanoma. She was at UPenn, and I had myeloma, and I was at Dana-Farber. So all 3 of us, but I was supposedly the medical person. And so, you know, what I learned from them was all those things. Like, you have to give me the calendar. You have to tell me when and where you need me. You have to help me work on the things that I really want to work on. And you need to find other resources for those things that you don't need me for. And, you know, take on that responsibility so that you're not dependent on one person to do all that for you.
Well, I like that, and 2 sort of follow-ons to that. So first, it sounds like a strong communication and a plan is critically important, because the more you understand and have context as to what you're both going through, or all of you are going through, the easier it is to navigate and feelings don't get hurt or people don't get frustrated. The other is, we mentioned my new book before we started recording, but Wired for Purpose, one of the key elements of it really is that gratitude engine.
Yes.
And it doesn't cost anything to say thank you. I know some people are too prideful to do that, but it does actually have biological, physiological impacts on our bodies to do that. And I've talked to a lot of people, you know, former employees of mine, that said, after you left, you know, people weren't saying thank you for the work that I did. And I'm like, why would someone not do that, right? Why would a caregiver or as a patient not express that gratitude for all the work? And I think sometimes we just forget and take it for granted, but it is so critically important to give those thank yous. And I love that. I have not gotten through your full book yet, but I will. But I love that that's one of the messages.
The last page literally says there are 3 phrases that we need to say. Thank you, I'm sorry, I love you. I mean, and we just forget, like life gets busy, we forget. And then when you're in the thick of it, your family and your friends and those people that are supporting you really, really matter. And you want them with you for the long haul for all the right reasons. So don't burn those bridges. I felt like I had led a very, very purposeful life working in cancer research for so many years. I still do. But if you have a great, purposeful life, but you don't have anybody to share it with, that's not happy.
Well, I love those three things, and I'm going to sort of co-opt those. I will give you credit for that. But just like your sort of recommendation up front of the world would be a better place if we treated our, our fellow human beings like a dog, those are three things that you could get a long way with if you just say, thank you, I'm sorry,
And I
and
love
what was the
you.
last one? Yes, and
I
I love
love
you. I
you.
love you in particular as such. My
Yeah,
wife and I make a point of trying to say that to each other multiple times during the day because
that's nice.
one, you never know what's going to happen, and it is nice to know that you're appreciated. And I think there are people that sometimes take that for granted, and it doesn't feel good.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right, well, I have one more serious question, and then we have three, well, two
Okay.
lighter questions and one sort of
Okay.
also meaning of life. But this one's about healthcare inequity. So you've
Mm,
acknowledged that financial resources often dictate outcomes. And I had a gentleman named Joe Andruzzi. He and his wife, Jen, run the Joe Andruzzi Foundation. He's a former football player, won 3 Super Bowls, and they're doing amazing things for cancer care in New England and looking to spread out beyond that. But we talked about something very similar, and it was, I think, financial toxicity was the
yeah.
way they framed it. How can your 12-step guide be adapted for patients who don't have the same access to top tier academic centers or private funding?
I think the 12 steps give you all the tricks by which to do it. So, for example, I understand that not everybody can get to an academic center. I mean, just based on where you live, what you can afford to do, insurance, it can be anything. 70% of care is at the community. But you can often get a second opinion at an academic center. And we all know from experience, if you do that, that second opinion will often help you to strategize your game plan so that your local doctor can execute on it. And they're often available to you when you have additional questions. So I feel like that part becomes really, really important. I think the other issue around health equity is that you have to understand when 70% of the care is out at the community, the patient has to be ready to understand the questions they want to ask. So for me, the 12 steps walk you through 3 phases. If you're newly diagnosed, I'm teaching you how to do your research, just like we talked about with Google and AI. I'm teaching you how to find the right medical team, what they all look like from a radiation oncologist to surgical oncologist to medical oncologist, how to find them. In the second phase of the book, I walk you through the treatment. What are all the diagnostics you need to get done? What do you need to know about precision medicine? How do you tolerate the treatments? How do you find a trial? And then the third phase of the book is you so-called rang the bell, which I don't really love that because you really are not done at that point in time. You know what you should be aware of. A lot of patients face depression at that point, and you need to take care of yourself. There's secondary cancers. You need your screenings. And then obviously the caregiving side. And then what you need to tell your family. Like my children are 30 now. They need to know if you're at high risk when you see your primary care, and please tell me you have one. That means you have to understand you might be going in early for some of these screening tests just because of your family history. Make sure it's all gets shared. So I feel like those 12 steps, and again, you don't have to buy the book. They're on my website at kathygiusti.com. I share all those tips with everybody on social media and on the website because I really do want to make sure every patient has access to the best ideas and approaches to extend their lives as long as possible.
Well, it's so great that you put that together, and I will also link to that in the show notes so
Yeah.
people can get access.
Mhm.
And I think it's having again just written a book. There's a lot of the knowledge that you can distill, but I think sometimes having that deeper context and the understanding of what the process is and really digging deep can be helpful. So while you can get access to some of the highlights, and we've shared some of them, don't skimp and go out and get the audio or the physical copy of the book. So.
Well, and congrats on your book because it is a heavy lift. And so I'm so glad you're able to get that launched. It's amazing.
Well, the crazy thing about that, without digressing too much, is like walking back over the last, I'm 57, 30 years of my sort of professional life and looking at all of the different steps. And one of the things that is helpful, I actually just sort of turned a friend onto this the other day. There's a site called archive.org. I don't know if you've ever used it, but
Mm-mm.
literally every website that has ever existed in the history of the world has been archived on this site. Now, it doesn't capture video at least not well, or audio, but I was able to go back and look at websites that I literally built in
Oh,
1994
wow.
using like the most primitive of tools, and they're pretty horrible. Actually, I have a few screenshots in the book, but it is crazy to sort of walk back over your life, right, and think of all the things that you've done and the people you've interacted with. For me, it was all the wisdom that I gained from
Mhm.
really smart people. Jim Weiss, I know you know
Yeah.
Jim. Jim just had such an amazing impact on my life and my career. So anyway, thank you for that. And it was a labor of love, but I'm
Yes.
glad to have it out in the world, just like I'm glad that we have your book out in the world. All right. So a few last questions, and these are questions that I ask all the guests.
Okay.
What is a show or podcast you are binging right now? And do you listen to Amy Poehler? She has a
Love Amy
podcast called
Poehler.
Good
Yeah.
Hang.
Hmm.
So one of the ways she asked this is, what's making you smile right now? And so maybe I'll rephrase that in the future, but a show or podcast you're binging right now that you're really enjoying.
I'm going to admit this. I am a reality TV junkie. So I love Traders because I can watch that with my husband. He really loves that too. But then I also watch these ridiculous shows like Love is Blind. I don't know why. I just find it crazy entertaining. And I think when you're dealing with oncology and talking to cancer patients all day long, you just need something kind of silly to watch.
Well,
I'm just going to admit it. I may
you
hear
know
that.
what? Owning is a lot of it, and I think
Yeah.
there is something to that. Like when you have watched or done a lot of heavy things,
Yeah.
and you've done a lot of heavy things, and dealing with oncology is very heavy. It is nice to have something that you can be a little bit mindless with, and it's not hard to pay attention to. And so I love that you're honest about that. More serious one, but something I always love to hear the answer to. Biggest regret.
Oh, this one's easy for me. I was accepted to medical school, two medical schools. I think I applied to three or four. I thought that my father, who was a physician, would be thrilled with that. But it turned out one of the medical schools, Jefferson in Philadelphia, he had gone there and they sent him a notice in advance before I told him I'd been accepted. And I happened to see him. We went out to get breakfast and he ripped my acceptance letter that they had sent to him in front of me and said, "You will
Wow.
not do this." And I was like,
Wow.
"What?" I mean, I'd been pre-med in college for, 4 years. Why all of a sudden? And he just said, "Medicine's not fun anymore. It's bureaucratic. I don't like it. You're not going to like it. You're much better as a business person." He said, "I will not help you. I will not help you pay for any of this." And he said, "Go take a leave of absence, like just defer and go to work. And if you do that, then maybe I'll help you after a year or two." And so I went to work for Merck. And I did love working on the business side. It was true. And I went from Merck on to Harvard Business School. But to this day, I still regret that I just didn't do it. Kind of
We'll talk
stinks.
about a sliding door moment, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
you chose path B versus path A. And obviously you put a lot of good into the world with path B, but it would have been interesting to see what happened with path A. And I'm sorry that
It's
that
okay.
happened. I'm sure he had good reason, but at the same time,
Yeah, he was
kind
a
of
tough
kind of
guy.
let me make my own decisions, right?
Yes, exactly. Technically, it's on me. I could have found the loans. I could have done everything. I did the same thing for business school. I could have done the same thing for med school. So, we have to own our choices. We can't, as my husband says, you can't blame your parents when you're in your 60s.
No, it's fair. And I mean, my parents are no longer with us. And so,
Well,
I have to be extra careful with that, but there is a point where you get to that. But at the same time, it's hard, especially it wasn't like he was a plumber or like a, computer
no.
programmer and told you, it's like, I've walked these shoes, I've gone to this school, don't do it. And so there's an element of you that has to be a little bit like, okay, if he's
Yeah.
telling me this, then maybe
He
he
was
knows
pretty
of which he
adamant.
speaks. Yeah, it sounds like he was. Well, anyway, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And then the last one, hopefully this is a light, easy one, but which band or artist, ideally one that's no longer around, would you like to have most seen?
Okay, I'm not a music person, so I'm going to answer this differently. I'm going to answer
Okay.
this, who do I really appreciate? Because while at the MMRF, I worked with a lot of celebrities and musicians. And I have to tell you, the ones I loved were the ones that came to us and said, "I want to make a difference to you. I want to help you. And so I'm going to just do an entire concert for you and for your galas and not charge you a thing." And that was Paul Simon and Diana
Wow.
Krall. And they played together on the stage. Paul Simon, Diana Krall. It was like just one of those moments that you just sit there and say, that is humanity. Like these are two unbelievable people that just came to help. And so I want to give kudos to them.
Well, I love that for two reasons. One, I like both of those artists a lot. Two, that's amazing. And then the three, I cheated. I had been asking a question and I took one out because I'm asking the flash questions up front. And that is, who is the person, the most famous person you met that you've been most impressed with? And so you gave me a nice twofer there, which is here are two artists that came together that did this good work and were, generous human beings. So thank you
Yeah.
for making that easy for me.
Yeah. Isn't that what life is all about, really? I mean, isn't that what we're here to do, is make life better for everybody else in the next generation? So, yeah, I love that.
For sure. One last thing, which I usually ask guests, but I think you mentioned it earlier, but I do like to let people know how they can get involved. And so
Mhm.
if there are any things that, MMRF obviously is one of them, where can people go and what else would you like people to do to get involved or to get involved with you? Where
Yeah,
can they
so
head to?
everybody can find me. I have a website, kathygiusti.com, and then I'm on social just under my name. You can find me anywhere, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. And then for the MMRF, yes, you can go directly to their website too at multiplemyeloma.org.
Okay, thank you. And
Of
just
course.
for those, I think you'll see it in the description and all the show notes, and we'll put a link in there. But it's GIUS as in Sam, T as in Tom, I. So you know exactly, you're not looking under a different spelling. But
Thank you.
Kathy, thank you, A, for all that you've done and put into the world, and B, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend some time with me and our listeners. It's really important, and I loved our conversation.
I did too. Thank you so much. It was really fun.